My name is Greg Auerbach. I've been transitioning and evaluating practices for over 20 years, and I'm excited for you to join me as we talk about 6 ways to sabotage your practice value, or hopefully not. First, just to talk about value itself. Value is ultimately a function of 2 things, and we're going to talk about this a lot: net income and risk. Everything that we come back to is always going to come back to either increasing net income or decreasing risk, the core of value. Let's talk about number 6, which is the economy. There are good economies and bad economies, and there's things that factor into your practice every day on either side of it. For a good economy, obviously we have good patient flow, elective care is getting taken care of. In a bad economy for your practice, hygiene could be having cancellations all over the place, and you may have declined or delayed treatment. On both sides of a good economy and a bad economy, we have interest rates factors as well as the cost of capital. So in a good economy, the interest rates have gone up, cost of capital may have gone up accordingly. Inflation, which happens in a lot of cases with a good economy, and then market return, just too much money coming into the market, and therefore an investor is willing to put their money there as opposed to investing in a business or into a dental practice. In a bad economy, again, for interest rates or cost of capital, those rates may come down. The cost of capital probably will come down as everyone is trying to get more money into the economy overall to resurrect it. Inflation could be down as well, and the market returns may be down. So in both factors, there's good components of it. Again, a strong practice, but maybe difficulty as far as the financial markets goes. But in the bad economy, you can have poor issues in the practice, but stronger issues as far as how money is flowing to the overall economy. In either case, though, there's nothing you can do about it. We bring this up because it is a part of valuations. It's important to know, but all you can do is keep the steady course and keep practicing as best you can. Which brings us to our next point, which is number 5, systems. Systems drive your practice. So it's how well does your engine run is what we're evaluating when we're looking at practice value. So things that can actually damage value in your practice: poor recall system, not collecting, so having poor receivables, deficiencies in chartings, or just new patient flow being hard. Broken scheduling overall, which means indications either something is happening at the front desk or, again, patients aren't coming into the practice. Something that we deal with all the time is team member retention. Not having staff there to take care of your patients or just having a revolving door. That can be a huge challenge overall to systems. Then we talk about facility and equipment, and this is probably where we get the question the most as far as value goes, because we have the overall facility, which has and is made up of just the number of treatment rooms, the age and the condition of the equipment itself, the technology that's built into the practice, and then just how there's room and how the facility is used overall. The big question here is, if you look at the top pictures, do you want to invest in that, or would you invest more in the bottom? And of course, the bottom 2 pictures, which is presenting a more modern and updated look, would typically carry more value because there's less that has to be changed. So when we come back to talk about risk again, staff that's stable, good charting, good recall, and a modern, updated, technologically updated office space, all of that decreases risk and therefore it increases value. But if you haven't touched your practice in 20, 30, 40 years, aesthetically or technologically, huge risk because somebody has to take that over and fix it. This leads us up into number 4, services mix. This is something that's not really thought about much, but what's going on to get you to produce what you're producing in the practice? And ideally, we're talking about services that are outside of your specific specialty, keeping that under 5% of the overall. So general practitioners, we're talking about endo, surgical, complex implant placement. The big one that we see a lot is banded and bracketed orthodontic. But even sleep apnea or just being the super GP where you can do everything or you're just a really high producer. Keeping any of those specialties overall under 5% is where we want to be. We want to keep your practice a general restorative practice, which is the solid hygiene program. For specialists, if you're outside of your specialty, this presents a challenge. In any of this, we're trying to, 1, obviously increase your net income by keeping you focused on what you're doing, but 2, decrease the risk of who's taking over the practice. When you're doing something that's outside of your specialty, and again, we get over that 5% of production, which is included in any specialty outside of what you normally do, it's very difficult to find that replacement. Higher replacement risk mean lower value because, again, we can't bring someone in as easily. Or just think about it, the overall market is much smaller to bring someone in to plug them into your practice, and therefore it's much harder to maintain the practice, harder to retain the net income, and therefore a riskier proposition and lower value. In all, we're talking about reproducibility. We need to bring that either associate or new practitioner in to replace you to do exactly what you're doing and keep the practice operating. Number 3, fees and payer mix. Another thing that's not really thought about much is your fee schedule. And this is something that we preach on and I have a soapbox about whenever I have the opportunity. Keep your fee schedule in line. If it's low for your area, low in general, you've not done fee increases in a long time, or again, you're just out of step, you need to focus on this. In all, expenses in your offices don't go down. You must keep up your fee schedule, therefore, to pay and keep your overall top-line collections strong. Collections, though, can also be affected by the payer mix. And by payer mix, we're talking about any insurance plans and or fee-for-service, Medicaid, Medicare, HMO, whatever may be running through your office. This payer mix can be a huge drag on a practice depending on how it's put together. So if you have, again, fee schedules that are out of date or low, or reimbursement rates that are very low, you have receivables that are not being collected from the insurance companies, all of this is affecting your top line collection. Another thing is imbalanced mix in those different insurance plans themselves. If you're running a fee-for-service office and then you're trying to inject HMO in on a regular basis, those are typically two incompatible modes of practice, and therefore it can be a drag on your practice overall. HMO practices can be very efficient at running just HMO. Hugely profitable, hugely productive, but focus just on that. Same thing for a fee-for-service or a fee-for-service PPO office. In all, we're looking for you to work smarter, not work harder. Work towards the practice that you can have and make sure you're extracting as much, whether it be through the fee schedules, again in a fee-for-service office, and or your fee schedule plus the reimbursement and renegotiations with your insurance plans, plus the mix, so you're creating the greatest efficiency for your practice. Which brings us to number 2. Again, we're talking about top-line revenues. Revenues drive overhead, which drives net income. The dreaded decline, though. What's happening? What are we looking at when we see a year-over-year decline in your practice? So the questions that come up, whether it be from us as evaluators or from a purchaser, is just the sustainability of the practice. Trying to figure out what's going on. Is there a management focus? Is there a quality focus? Do we have, again, back to systems, all of this ties together. Do we have deficiencies in your systems where we're not able to bring in, process, and treat patients properly? Are there other issues in the practice overall? What's doing it? Now look, we know that there are some times when things happen. Obviously, COVID happened. We dealt with it. We knew that it was a short-term situation in the scope of an entirety of a practice. We managed through it, and we were able to look at justifications as to what happened in the short term. But we're looking at broad term, and we typically will evaluate 3 to 5 years worth of data. And if there is a consistent decline in the practice, all of these questions come up. So again, we're looking at your most recent, but we're looking at the trends overall. And that's both from the top line revenues, your overhead itself. So 1 year changes, they may not affect it. Even if it's the most current year, it may not affect it if it's out of bounds with the trends overall. We're trying to figure out what the practice is as its own. That said, downward momentum is the death's kiss of valuation of practice sales. So keeping away from any decline is super important. We really look for stability overall. We would take year-over-year stability over a decline for sure. Look, ideally, all of us want to see growth in your practices, but as long as you're stable year over year, that is what shores up and really secures value. So number 1, still talking about dollars here, is overhead. Overhead, again, when we're talking about the net income and the risk of your practice, is driving net income. Now, it can also drive risk because overhead that's out of line is incredibly risky, especially for an investor. That said, overhead it comes out of collections and then leads to net income itself. And so focusing on overhead and making sure that it's not overwhelming can be a huge key to the success and the highest valuation possible. So we're looking at high percentages of overhead, and we're looking at not just dollars, but also percentages, because we look at both. We want you to manage the operation though. Don't look at pennies. The pennies aren't really where it is. That said, pennies do make up percentages. So pennies can drive your staff nuts if you run around the office trying to squeeze everything out of it. But if you keep your eyes on the percentages, and especially if we're able to find a percent here and there, we can easily get back in overhead sometimes 5 and 10%, which can be a huge factor in affecting not only your net income, but the overall value of the practice. Keep in mind, there are big expense line items that are always there. Your biggest one will always be staff payroll and benefits. So keeping an eye on that. Maybe you have a staff member that's been with you for 20 or 30 years. Make sure we're not giving them increases in their pay every year, because sometimes they will get out of line, or often they will by the time we get to the point of evaluation or transition. Same thing with benefits. Everybody is very keen and looking at where health insurance is in particular, but look at the overall package. Make sure your overall staff compensation numbers are in line with where they should be for your area. Another big thing would be inefficient facility use. Perhaps you have an 8-operatory office and you're only using 3. While there's a lot of space there, and depending on what your rent cost is, or utilities, or other expenses that go into using that space, it may be worthwhile to try to utilize it. It may not be, but it's something that we look at, and it's something that could be a drag on your overhead due to the overall cost of what it takes to keep that operational. Again, fees and collection operations can affect your overhead. So keep in mind, again, overhead is a percentage. And if you're under operating for your practice overall, or you're under collecting for the operation that you're operating, then your overhead percentage will be high. So there are cases where we look at a practice that will be operating such at a level that could be operating twice as more as far as collections goes, and the overhead therefore could be 50% higher than it needs to be. So make sure you're right-sizing your overall operation. Make sure your fees are in line and you're collecting that money that you're doing in production, and therefore it brings your overhead back in line. Mismanage overhead equals risk. So again, when we're talking about it, net income in just the cash at the end of the day. But as I said before, just mismanaging your overhead and having it out of control can be a hugely risky situation. We here at Henry Schein Dental Practice Transitions do practice valuations, both traditional and EBITDA. We do hundreds per year throughout the country. We do private practice transitions, and don't forget, we do multi-location doctor and corporate transactions as well. Again, hundreds of valuations, hundreds of transactions a year. Our team is truly an expert at what we do, and you can't find better. Please feel free to reach out or click that link and find out more from your local representative.